and welcome to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I am Dustin, and I have the pleasure of being here today with Eric Shorter, who is a musician, a poet, an actor, and a dad. Thank you so much for being here, Eric.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dustin. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So I actually saw you a few months ago when you were doing the poetry for Black History Month. And so I wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about your poetry, and then we can explore some of the other areas as well. But how did you get, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started writing poetry?
That's a long story. The Black Lives Matter poetry project actually brought me back out into the public sphere again.
Okay.
I've been writing since the mid-'80s. I really started writing in earnest when I was in college, and that was a long time ago. And it was always just an exercise in keeping notes. You know, I have a lot of mental overflow. I think we've grown up in a world where it's constant bombardment, so much input from all directions, and some people learn to tune it all out, and I've always had this problem of taking it all in, and so
okay.
Everything I take it in, and it causes overflow, and sometimes I stop and I have to think about things, the little things that I see.
So when you're taking it in, are you writing it down so that you can create poems later, or are you doing it on the spot?
Mostly on the spot, and mostly based on an observation, an experience, something that I can relate to something else. And for years, I always kept a pen. I still always keep a pen on me. And I used to keep a pen in some form of paper, if it was a notebook or just a scrap of paper. And so I actually have kept all of the original material that's handwritten.
Wow.
And
wow.
I still do it now. In fact, I have in my bag, I found an old notebook that was starting to fall apart, but still had a lot of pages in the back of it.
Right.
You find a notebook and you didn't use all of it.
Right. Right.
So I ripped out all of the pages I didn't use, and I said, all right, the remainder of this, I'm going to create another chapbook.
Okay.
And that's what it is. They're chapbooks of my mental overflow. I only later in life, I should say over the last 10 years maybe, did I start to actually practice editing.
So this was just free-flowing ideas that you were writing down?
I think the wordplay is part of my training in music as well.
Okay.
Music prior to the recording industry, everything was, it happens now and that's it. If you're not in the room with a musician, we don't hear music, right? So once the recording apparatuses came around, and now young people today, they've got the entire world's catalog of music that can be streamed at the touch of a button.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating concept as a musician to know that when I'm playing, what I play at that time, that's it. So hopefully I play it well. So some of the writing is also that way, where when I'm writing, how I deconstruct an observation or what I convey in terms of the emotions, hopefully it comes out right. Now I'll make mistakes, and so I've recently started working on long form poetry.
Can you explain that to the people who may not understand what short form versus long form poetry is? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, short form poetry is usually a quick blurb or a stanza or two.
Okay.
Things that are a specific topic, and boom, that's it.
Okay.
So I wrote one in my head the other day. I could probably recite it. It was something to the effect of, the heart is a battery for the soul. We put ours together and made three. Magic.
Wow.
And that's the name of the poem, Magic. And it's 3 lines, and 3 is the magic number. And it was kind of like, 2 hearts together, make 3. So just a weird thought.
So how do you?
But that's a short form.
Okay, yeah.
That's
So
like a bing.
so for a short form, that is very tight and put together. And did you have to go over that short form several times to get to that point?
No.
You just, I mean, you literally just, okay, I just thought of this.
It comes out of my head, and I'm like, oh, that's good, I have to write it down. But that's the overflow, so I'll see something, and I'm like, oh, I have to write that down. But I've recently started thinking, all right, how do I delve into a concept?
And does that get you into the long form?
That gets me into the longer form.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what this record was
Oh, yeah.
about.
Please, sure, yes.
So, part of it is I made a record, but this record is actually made of 2 assignments that I gave myself. You asked me about my writing, and
Yes.
I almost always invariably write in the abstract. I kind of avoided political or anything that's publicly contentious, so to speak.
And why is that?
I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Okay.
I don't like
makes sense.
to, because being contentious in poetry seems to cause a friction, which is ironic because the poem for the Black Lives Matter poetry project, which is how we came together,
Right.
first, that was something that I felt like I had to write. And the experience of what was going on, and it's rare that I do it, I felt like I had to get something out.
Okay.
And I can tell a little bit about that poem. I had to turn the news off. I mean, another murder, another person of color shot down dead or mistakenly murdered for God knows what reason. And I turned off the television in abject sadness, and I went to my record player, because I still have a record player and listen to vinyl, and I was pulling out the records that were up front, and I had both the Rolling Stones and Howlin' Wolf. And so the opening line, exactly how long is a moonlight mile, goes to a Rolling Stones song about moonlight. It's called the Moonlight Mile. And people don't know, the Rolling Stones, their very first television appearance, they refused to play the show here in the United States. They refused. They said, we will not book the show unless you book Howlin' Wolf with us.
Oh.
And so they brought this big Delta Blues 6'4" behemoth of a legend to an all-white television show. And but they said, we don't understand the fuss. We're only playing your music. Like, we came over here playing your music. And then they ended up playing their own music, and I actually went to see them.
Did you?
My brother lives in Austin, Texas, and I just went to see him 2 weeks ago.
Antone's by any chance?
Hmm?
Did you go to, was it at Antone's?
No, it was
okay.
in Austin, Texas, at the Motor Raceway.
Oh, the Motor. Okay, there's a famous blues place that I used to go to called Antone's.
Oh, no,
That's
no.
in.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen him in a small blues
Yeah,
venue.
it's
This was the Auto Raceway.
Right.
This was, and you know what? They still crushed it. But in my head, I was thinking, I can put those two together musically. And in poetry, I can put things together that grab from everywhere.
And those
And so
two
that's-
records got you to thinking about the
Well,
Black
then
Lives Matter.
Right, and so I wrote
poem?
that poem, and that's probably one of the more politically charged poems that I wrote.
Okay.
And I often will disguise those things. But here's the other irony of that. That poem, when I went to submit it, I had written other things that I thought were more appropriate to the Black Lives Matter poetry project, and I was going through, and something in the back of my head, I'm going, I know I wrote something else. I know I wrote something specific to this, and I could not find it. And because some of the material now I type digitally or on my phone, on notes instead of on a piece of paper. I didn't know where to find it. And I was about to hit submit, send the email off with these other poems. And I said, wait a minute. And I have a folder on my desktop computer called Work in Progress.
Okay.
And so I submit that poem unedited.
And that's the
That
one
came
that
out
chose.
of that came out of my Work in Progress folder, and I thought that I would delve into it and make it bigger. So
Okay.
this goes back to the beginning of some things just come out of my head, and everybody loved it. I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah, it was an
Well,
amazing poem. It was really.
well, that was the one I thought, oh, I'm going to work on this one.
Yeah.
And then I didn't work on it, and I submitted it. I was like, oh, we put that in. And I was like, okay.
So can you take us through your process of writing? And I know the short form sort of just comes to you, but can you take us through the process of the longer form poem?
You know, when I turned 30, I gave myself an assignment,
Okay.
which is the one side of this record. And it was because I'd been writing abstract all day long. I said, I got to write something with form and function.
Okay.
And so I went to the library and I did some research, and I found an ancient Japanese form called haikai no renga,
Okay.
which is essentially a haiku with a couplet. So it's 5-7-5, and the couplet is 2 lines of 7 syllables each.
Okay.
So a traditional haiku is 5-7-5, and the couplet is 7-7, and if you put them all together. So anyway, back in whatever the 15th century, the young poet said, we'll stay in form, we'll honor the masters, but we're going to write about whatever we want. It doesn't have to be about nature. It doesn't have to be about
okay.
the emperor.
Got
it can
it.
be about whatever we want.
Right.
So they were able to use what was considered vulgar language. And I thought, well, that speaks to me. That's that street slang, we don't care. You know, I was living in San Francisco in the Bay Area at the time, and so I carried around a notebook with me, and I only wrote down things that came out of my head in form. So if I thought of it in 5-7-5, I wrote it down.
Okay.
And then if I had written, like, well, I wrote something 5-7-5, now I have to do the couplet. So the couplet is actually the title of it, Ageless Turning Carousel is 7, and the line that follows that line is 1 spot for 2, good is gone.
Okay.
And so to me, it's like, ageless turning carousel, 1 spot for 2, good is gone. That came out of my head. You know, I see the Ferris wheel going around, I see the carousel, and I'm like, you know, you got your friend, let's jump on. 1 spot for 2, good is gone.
Right.
That landed in 7 syllables. Ageless turning carousel, 1 spot for 2, good is gone. So I wrote an entire year in that form.
So it sounds like it still, even though the shorter form just comes to you, it sounds like the longer form also just comes to you.
Well, that was an exercise. I made myself do it.
Oh, I
and then
see,
when
I
I
see.
turned 40, I said, all right, 10 years, another 10 years of writing abstract, let me do something different. So the other side of this record is a suite from a series of sonnets. I turned 40, I said, I'm just going to write sonnets for a year.
Got it.
And so I wrote 2 sonnets a month. It's 24 sonnets. I did 12 in traditional Shakespearean, then I did 6 in the Italian form Petrarchan, and then I found another Anglo form Spencerian, Spencer.
Okay.
And I did another 6, so it was 24 poems, and I called it Saturday Night Sonnets, and again it was, gosh,
And you know what? Before you get to that, we're right at the point where we're going to take a break. Awesome.
It's just a chapbook.
But I want you to, I want to pick up on that when we come back.
Take a break then. I'll
We'll
come
be
back.
right back. I'm Dustin. I'm here with Eric Shorter, and we will be right back in a moment.
It's an onion.
Hi, I'm Dustin Dumas, and I am here with Eric Shorter. And just at the end of the last segment, you were going to tell us a little bit about the books that you use to, like the writing books that you use and the sonnets that you've written, and just tell us a little bit more about that process.
Well, again, I think it goes back to I had an absence of process.
Okay.
I
All right.
generally just write whatever comes out. And what I started doing was giving myself assignments. And I did it for my 30th year, I did it for my 40th year, and I've recently been forcing myself to say, okay, here's a form, here's a function, stay in these parameters.
Okay.
Because otherwise anything goes. You know?
So you're trying to discipline yourself.
Give myself, exactly, give myself some discipline. You know, I'll read I'll read graffiti on the street and go, oh my God, and like I said, I take things in and I start thinking about it and I have to write about it. So,
yeah, show us some examples. You have a
well,
couple
so this record has a suite from this chapbook that I
And
wrote.
explain what a chapbook is for people who don't.
A chapbook is a small book of poetry. It's typically not more than 25 to 30 poems.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sometimes maybe more, 40. But once you start getting over 40 poems, they start thinking of, people call it full length.
Okay.
So chapbooks are generally chapbooks are things that poets will use at readings to give away. So this isn't even the chapbook. This is just a printout on my Xerox. But these are all of the sonnets, and I put them in an order that doesn't follow the written order. I took 2 from the Shakespearean and 2 from, and put them together. But then when my buddy said, let's make a record, I picked 4 out of here. And I'll recite one for you if you want at some point.
Okay.
But all of these actually were originally written in a cheap notebook like this that I would carry around with a pen like this. And as I was saying earlier, I was cleaning out my desk and I found this old notebook with all of these work notes in them. But half the notebook wasn't used, so I ripped out the work notes and said, well, I can carry this around when I'm on the train again.
Right.
Like the old days, as opposed to using my phone. And so I'm only 3 pages in with recent observations.
But you know what I like about that too is that it's not wasteful. Okay, just
No,
from
I
that
mean,
perspective as well. It's like you're like, I have half of the notebook left, so
Yeah,
I'm going to continue writing. So if you want to, I think we'd love to hear.
Well,
something.
here's what's interesting. I was looking at the cover, which is why I didn't throw it out. I threw some stickers on it.
Oh, okay.
And I'm looking at this cover and I'm going, Wexford Earthworm, the Lucky Bastard. Those are the stickers on it. And I'm like, well, there you have it. That's the title of this chapbook. Wexford Earthworm, the Lucky Bastard. And one of the last things I wrote a couple days ago was, remember that time the teacher tried to explain to everyone there ain't no such thing as a free lunch? That's where I'm at. Alone with my tray, grateful to the core. So this will probably end up half a stanza in however many pages I end up writing in this. And who knows when I'll be done, but you heard a line from Wexford Earthworm, the Lucky Bastard.
And so that'll be the
I hope that's the discipline, right? So the process is the process, right? It's whatever
But that's
happens.
great though, because
Yeah.
you know the fact you said this is something that you have taken on the train or something like this, where you've just been able to write down wherever you're going, and that's nice to have that, to be able to create wherever. Because there are some people, they have to create in a studio, they have to create in a small room, they can't have any distractions. And the fact that you said that you carry it around because you may be inspired at any moment, that's pretty incredible.
I told a story about something that I witnessed just a couple weeks ago, and it's the reason why I do this. And you know, I'm just typing it on my phone, in my notes, things, they're getting all over the place. When I put it in a book, I'm like, that's where all that material lives.
Okay.
Whereas if I do it on the computer, or I do it on my phone, or I do it in a text or whatever, I have to piece it together and it's difficult to see again.
Right.
But I think I told you this story before. I was on 8th Avenue in front of the post office, and I had a few minutes to kill, and this little boy was walking with his dad, and it was cold, and so he was all bundled up and had his thing, and he looked up, and there on the post office steps were hundreds of New York City pigeons. They flock to those steps. Sometimes it's seagulls, sometimes it's pigeons, sometimes it's both, but the kid looks up and he sees all these birds. He's like, birds! And he's gonna rip right through them and make them. And Dad's like, oh, no, 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 no. And he takes the kid's like, oh. And he's upset. He's a little kid. He wants to blast those birds into the sky. And I thought, wow, how cool would that have been to see this little child just explode with delight at scattering these pigeons into the sky. And the dad was right. It was rush hour. It would have been chaos. But when I went to write it down, the emotion attached with that desire, that joy, that like, I need to do this. I need, like, that child. I felt sad. Like, I should have done it for him. I should have just...
He could have lived vicariously.
And how cool would that have been for the kid and all of us?
Yeah.
Like, somebody probably would have been upset, but everybody would have been like, oh my God.
All these pigeons.
I mean, New York City pigeons. Whoosh. But so when I see something like that and I hear that moment in time, I want to be able to remember it.
Okay.
And so that's the reason. And then sometimes I just wake up and go, and all the stuff that had come in just comes out of my head, and I got to write that down.
Really?
It happens.
Like, do you mean like dreams that you remember, or you just mean you just woke up and you're like, oh, I have this idea?
I can be falling asleep and something pops in my head, or I could wake up and something's in my head and I have to write it down. Or I could just be walking down the street and I have a notion, and the notion is coming out in my thoughts in a word play that makes life seem interesting.
Okay. So I wanted to transition a little bit because I know we've talked about your poetry and your writing, but something that's parallel to that is your music.
Right.
And so tell us, like, do you write your own music? What instruments do you play?
I first learned music playing the flute in elementary school.
Okay.
And I got to middle school, junior high at the time, and my friend said, we need a baritone saxophone player. And I was in the flute section, and there were only girls in the flute section, which at first I thought was cool because I was close to the girls, but then I was like, wait, I'm the only dude in there. I was like, I want to be close to the girls, but it got to be cool. It's middle school. So I switched to saxophone, and that was my main focus of study. I studied saxophone, and largely classical, not jazz. I studied through college. I went on playing in bands, funk bands, rock bands, reggae bands, all kinds of stuff. And then I went back to school and studied with the legendary great Wadada Leo Smith, who's probably one of the foremost living trumpeters out there now. And I studied with him at Cal Arts for a year, as well as took some master classes and played a lot of avant-garde, more left of center jazz, as it were. And then I ended up in some funk bands, and I still play. Taught myself guitar, taught myself bass. I'm comfortable behind a kit, but I'm not a drummer.
Okay. Are you writing music for all of these
Yeah,
instruments?
I do. I've been working on some materials, and sometimes, I feel like the writing needs to be like the poetry, where this is what's happening, that's what it is.
Don't over-edit.
But I did write the material for this record. So
Oh, okay.
the material on this album, both the suite and the Haikai no Renga, which is a 15-minute epic, by the way. It's one side is 15 minutes.
Okay.
The other side is 4 of the Shakespearean sonnets put to a suite. And I had a classical background, so I treated it like a traditional suite. I did an allegro up front, a scherzo for the second movement, an andante, a waltz for the third movement, and then the presto finale with the coda at the end, right?
Okay.
And The waltz was interesting because I wrote that on the guitar, and I wrote it on an acoustic guitar, just the chords. But my buddy who plays keyboards, he came in on the electric piano. It was really nice. And ironically, that particular sonnet was probably one of the more, how shall I say, politically charged for me.
Oh, okay.
Where
That's not something you normally do.
No, I was just making my own social commentary about hypocrisy and this disillusion with our government and the way we've been brainwashed, so to speak, on so many levels. It's a broad philosophical concept. And I think that's why I avoid the political commentary, because there's so many layers to where we are in our space and time. And we have such a short, finite amount of time. I don't like to walk around feeling angry or
I can
bitter. I don't have enough time to be bitter.
Right.
Then I'd be happy. And it is the pursuit of happiness, right? So
that's true. You mentioned something as you were talking about your music, is that you have other people who are also part. You may have somebody who does the kit, and you're on the.
Oh yeah.
How do you do that? Because you said it sounds like you're. And I'm sorry, we only have like a minute and a half, but can you tell us how do you do it so that it comes together?
Oh, well, I'll bring a sketch or some notes or things, and I'll say, we're going to work together like this. But when you're working with solid musicians, like real tight musicians that are professionals, the ear is there. They pick up things, and then we can collaborate. But I'll bring in chords, or I'll bring in a bass line or a rhythm, and then I'll say, this is the concept.
Okay, and then they just follow along.
Do you want me to recite one?
Yes, if you could recite one, that would be great. We have about a minute left.
Well, this will probably take a minute. So the
Okay.
waltz one, the one that I said was politically charged, it goes, such hypocrisy of a ruling class with false dominion over others' lives, pursuing happiness just to kiss ass, thieves with their spoils to poison your wives, sophisticate crooks building large castles, there to reside in their shadows of fear, with pompous rituals, ties and tassels, liars all uncommonly cavalier. Few decide ownership of laws and land. What's best for the masses is tough to chew. The absence of balance follows demand. Devils take good hearts and cleave them in two. When the grass grows tall on the playing field, we'll meet on the level before we'll yield.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
So even in writing the sonnets, it's like I still have to keep my own vernacular.
Right.
I'm going to stay in your form of, like, this is a Shakespearean sonnet. Here's iambic pentameter. Here's the rhyming, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, whatever.
But it's going to be in your style.
Yeah, it's going to be boogie down.
And because, exactly. Boogie down the Bronx. But before we leave, we're out of time. But can you tell us very quickly where people can find you on social media or
Instagram is original EJS, original EJS, and that's probably the best place to see me. Hi.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for being on. This was great.
Yeah.
I love getting to understand like the creative process, so I appreciate that.
Well,
thank you. And hopefully you can come on again and
Anytime.
share some of the other new work.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you got the newest.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I'm Dustin. This is Dustin's Kaleidoscope, and thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.